10 Sports in this December 11th, 2023 episode. Jam-packed show for you tonight. Jam-packed show. Got a guest for you here. We'll get to that in just a minute. But it is the best time of the year, isn't it? It's getting cold, which usually I'm a warm weather guy. I personally would like it to be for summer over winter to make it easier. But you know what? It's starting to get cold here where I'm at right now. It's 37 degrees. I got to go run some errands for the wife after this show. I have to go out there. I'm not mad about it. I'm always interested at the beginning of the winter, how cold it is. Fired up about that. Also fired up. We have bowl games starting this week. Granted, not a lot of them, not a lot of SEC bowls, I should say, but bowl games in itself. We crowned a Heisman Trophy winner as well this past weekend. That winner was LSU's quarterback, Jaden Daniels. We'll discuss that in a little bit. We also have a fantastic guest. 247 Sports National Recruiting Analyst Cooper Petagna is joining us. About to send him the link right now so he can join us. And we'll get to him right off the bat. Talk a little portal and whatnot. We got a lot to discuss. Just letting Cooper know we just sent that, and we will wait on him to get going. But again, Cooper Petagna will join us from 247 Sports right off the bat. Talk about the transfer portal, how it'll affect some teams in the SEC. So that'll be fun as well. We had some big non-conference matchups on the hardwood as well this past weekend in the SEC. Probably the best Saturday, just specific day if you take away the whole week of Feast Week and the tournaments, Battle for Atlantis, Maui Invitational. Take away that stuff. This was solely that, December 9th day? Great matchups. Tennessee, Illinois, Alabama, Purdue. You had Auburn, Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, Oklahoma. Had a lot of good matchups across the board in basketball in the SEC this past week. I had a little so-so performance. But after we talk to Cooper, dig deep into this transfer portal, we'll go around the SEC. I touch on every SEC team, how they're doing in the portal, updated news on the coaching staff standpoint, some guys that are returning for the 2024 season. We'll talk about Jaden Daniels, why we don't need 800 Heisman voters. I'll tell you why I started liking Michael Penix a little later in the week last week. Like I mentioned, SEC basketball results, SEC coming week, and then we will round it out going over the SEC basketball power rankings. But first, like I mentioned, let's get to our guy here, Cooper Petagna. Coop, what up, baby? Representing the boot on the hat.
How we doing, Dave? Appreciate you having me, man.
No, man, I appreciate you hopping on. How's everything been? How was the big December 4th transfer palooza there at 247?
Pretty crazy. I mean, we knew it was going to be a hectic day, but we woke up to the Kyle McCord news, and then that kind of got things going, and then Dylan Gabriel, and then all of a sudden, you're kind of playing quarterback dominoes. That kind of was the theme throughout the day. Ended up talking about, the point of attack a lot. It was like a 5.5-hour show. It was a long day. So
I saw.
I do like it, like from a preparation standpoint, going from December 5th to when the first window opens, and then 2 weeks later you got National Signing Day. So from like a preparation macro level, 30,000 foot view, it kind of helps you kind of tie in what teams are doing around the country.
Again, we got with us Cooper Petagna, known Cooper for a while, national recruiting analyst for 247 Sports. I think Cooper's unique from this perspective where he's not just a career media guy. He's actually had boots on the ground in tremendous programs. He's ran recruiting departments, managed rosters at places like Michigan, Oregon, Washington. Hell, we just named 2 out of the 4 CFP semifinalists, and then Oregon was just on the outside looking in on that as well. Worked at Alabama, went to school at LSU. So I think Cooper, and really I think it's just Smoke, right? You and him, they're the only ones that work for 247 that have actually worked in college football. So I think you bring a totally unique perspective where you see the media side, but you've also been boots on the ground, been in these recruiting staff meetings with the Jim Harbaughs of the world, Mario Cristobal's of the world, going over, breaking down that roster. So you kind of just gave us some initial thoughts on the transfer portal. Is any other thoughts you just think just through the first true week? I mean, I even go back to that first Monday after the season ends where it kind of starts, but officially, as you know, December 4th. Any thoughts besides just some of the quarterback world, some other positions you've looked at that you like that's going on in the portal so far?
Yeah, I think the receiver room is super deep. And I think that's probably a trend that, we have seen. The receivers, I had a good talk with some personnel directors from around the SEC, and they feel very confident in terms of the quantity and the depth in the transfer portal. And that's 2 consecutive years that they felt that way, that in terms of, hey, if we want to go out and find a guy that's a B plus guy, transferring from a group of five school, there's certain programs that are going to have success doing that. So I think the receiver room is deep. The other room, Dave, that I'd be interested to get your thoughts on, that I think is just fascinating in terms of necessity a little bit more. Tight end. I kind of saw it last year, like Cam McCormick, who we had at Oregon. Man, he's been in college for, I want to say, like 7 years, been banged up. I think trying to get another year of eligibility at Miami. But his market alone, he had Miami, he had LSU, he had a handful of others. And then you think about guys like Jake Johnson out there this year, a couple other tight ends as well. I think those guys are a little bit more in demand than I think people think. So those rooms kind of stick out. I mean, I would say my other takeaway is just in general, it makes you think different about the high school rankings. The fascinating part about this, Andrew Ivins and I were talking about this, is that now it kind of brings the public, it brings their eyes to a certain level of college football in terms of the player pool that maybe 3 or 4 years ago they wouldn't have known, right? So you think about ranking these players now, and it's like, there's a receiver going to Georgia Southern from Hoover, Alabama, Jordan Woolen, I believe. Kind of a guy just came on our radar super late, had an okay season production wise, but checks a lot of boxes, from a track and field standpoint, really legitimate baseball prospect. And you're sitting there and you're like, all right, this guy doesn't have a lot going on, but you see the way, that college football is kind of shaping, and you see the roster movement and the fluidity and the rapidness of it. It makes you kind of have a different scope of how you grade these players. And as much as you've always wanted to be less about the school and the program that these players are attending, that happens. It's a subconscious part of the evaluation process, right? As much as you would love to rid yourself from that, I think now with the transfer portal, it's pretty fascinating grading guys. Just saying, hey, objectively, from a metric standpoint, this guy might be signing with a group of five school, but we believe that he's got Power Five upside, or maybe even potentially NFL upside at some point. And now the expectation is that if that player is good enough, somebody's going to find him, right? So you feel pretty confident about that. So the mesh between the high school and the transfer portal now more than ever is, I think we're starting to see some trends emerge that are going to change really just the whole landscape of college football in general.
Sticking to this is going to be one of my last questions, but you kind of just hit the tip of the iceberg for us. So again, Cooper has he's ran these departments before. So I was intrigued. I mean, you've talked off record before. You're back at Oregon, you're back at Michigan right now. Cooper Petagna is back in Ann Arbor, he's back in Eugene. What are messages? What are some plans you're presenting to a coach in today's age now that we don't have a big data? We don't have a lot of data on the portal really. So we're still relatively new, but we got 2 or 3 years on it. So how would you manage that right now? Like, how would you manage just a percentage, just for the people out there that really don't have a ton of intel, a ton of knowledge? You brought up the high school guys, some guys that are probably better than they are going to some group of five schools like Georgia Southern. How would you manage the portal, but also building that foundation? And as you know, football is one of the, if not the biggest developmental sport there is out there.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I remember when 2021. So what year would that have been of the transfer portal? It was still relatively new.
It was before the one-time transfer. Yeah, I mean, it was. They had the portal. What did the portal come out? 18, 19, I think, where you actually had like the database.
So before, I think the class of 2021 was my last year in college football, and I remember having the conversation with Mario Cristobal, and I remember at the time I was like, okay, what do we think in terms of roster flexibility, how many scholarships we need to allocate towards the portal? And I remember it was 3 to 4. And then I remember thinking by the next year, or maybe this number is closer to 7 to 8. And I thought about like, all right, well, if you're one of the top programs in the country, that number is probably you want to be around 7 to 8, right? Because you don't want that many holes to begin with. Then you think about the top teams in college football. I want to say the top ranked teams, top 6 ranked teams in the CFP currently as they stand now. Florida State was the highest last year, I think, with 12. I think that number is about right. But I also think it really depends. There's some contenders out there. I think brand awareness and program awareness is really important. Also, where you are geographically. I mean, like, you look at Ole Miss. I was talking to some people in Oxford. They took 23 transfers last year. They won 10. They won 10 games.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at the data, there were 14 teams that took 20 plus transfers last year. 7 of them went above 500, and the other 7 went below. Right. So if you're looking for some type of theme or pattern, what I would say to you is that the only theme or pattern is that there is a multitude of variables that you have to take into consideration when you start weighing out, all right, what is the correct number? And I think it is more case by case. And I think the other thing is, the thing for me, if I was a personnel director, to get back to your question, I think you got to lean so heavy on the offense and defensive line in terms of high school recruiting that I think you can sprinkle maybe 1 or 2 guys on each side every cycle, but that you don't want to start living there. Colorado is in this super fascinating spot, and I think Deion Sanders might be the only person to be able to thread the needle because of, I would say who he is and him being larger in life and the way that Colorado and Deion Sanders have just dominated the college football headlines this season. It's almost like he's got that bat signal out there since he's arrived in Boulder and say, hey, this is what we need. Every time he steps in front of a microphone, it's basically talking to any college football player out there. So I think that is a unique situation. I think that's almost the exception of the rule. So receivers, like I talked about, I think those guys are a dime a dozen. I think, Dave, you and I would both agree. I mean, the premium positions, 56% of Power 5 starting quarterbacks this year were one-time transfers, right? So that number is going to continue to inflate as well. So,
Cooper, what's your thought? You talk about quarterback. I might interrupt. I don't mean to interrupt you. I just want you. This question came right to my head right now. What's your thoughts on taking a high school quarterback? If you're at one of the top premier schools, the top 25 premier school in the country, you can usually probably get a pretty seasoned quarterback at some point. What's your thoughts on taking a high school quarterback at this point right now?
I think, I think you do it every year. I think it's part of that. I mean, I think LSU is a team that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but they're in a really fascinating situation. I think Garrett Nussmeier is certainly the guy that they expect in Baton Rouge to emerge. I still think they're looking for somebody to push him right behind him. You got Ricky Collins, who's played very little, and then you have Colin Hurley, who's coming in as in the 2024 cycle, right? So, it's not the traditional age of college football, and you don't know, right? If there's some guys out there that have some tools and some redeeming qualities, you get a little bit of context and you say, you know what, they might not have been in the right situation. Really, even as an insurance policy, I can tell you, we all thought at Oregon in 2020, Tyler Shuck was going to be the guy. He wasn't ready yet. And we brought in Anthony Brown as an insurance policy because I remember
from Boston College.
Really,
right?
Boston College. Our philosophy for that was, me being from New Orleans, and it was just kind of something that kind of peaked at the time. But I remember Drew Brees had ended up getting hurt. It was like the unimaginable had happened in New Orleans. It's a guy who had stayed relatively healthy his entire career. He ends up getting hurt, going down for 5 or 6 games. I think Teddy Bridgewater comes in and the Saints run the table during that span, and it kind of, shows you the importance of having that number 2, a guy that can come in and kind of steady the ship a little bit. So I think, listen, looking at Florida State too, why wouldn't you have a guy who at least has a little bit of name recognition as well?
Yeah.
If that guy wasn't Brock Glenn or Tate Rodemaker, and let's say it was somebody else, let's just call it Brock Vandegrift. Do you think Florida State gets in that game?
Yeah,
right?
they're looked at definitely more. Yeah, they're looked at differently than just like you said, the true freshman Brock Glenn. And like you said, Rodemaker wasn't a very highly recruited kid either.
Right. It's a little bit of a different dynamic, and it might be a one-off because the playoffs are going from 4 to 12 now, but I think that
Still, you
number
never know
2
when they're
will
battling that 13 or 12, 13 spot, like you said.
for sure. So yeah, now I think now more than ever, and the last thing I'll say, premium positions, right? Um, Pass rushers, corners, quarterbacks, those guys are extremely hard to find.
Coop, you bring up a
It
good point. You bring up a good point on Ole Miss from your perspective. Like you said, it's a case by case basis. Even the year, in 22 last year, they took a bunch of transfers, started off 7-0, but then lost 6 out of the last 7, ended up going 7-5 to end the year. It's like you said, they've been kind of one for two so far in the transfer portal. They won a 7-5 season with a decent amount of transfer guys, and then the next year you hit on some veteran guys in the secondary. You finished 10-2. Your only losses to Georgia and Alabama. So like you said, your stat would be in 7 for 7. Teams are kind of below 500, or what was it? What was the exact stat again? I had it written down.
Yeah, 14 teams, 7 above, 7 below.
7
Here's the
above.
other thing I'll say to Ole Miss. The thing that people will not realize this year when you look at Ole Miss is that you look at what Ole Miss has done through the high school ranks defensively. They're bringing in some guys that can play.
Yeah.
The Will Eccles kid, the Kamarion Franklin kid. You think about Jeffrey Rush as well. They've done a really good job at the point of attack. And the other thing that they've taken advantage of is Zach Arnett at Mississippi State. I would say it's typically 60-40. That's just my view on it in terms of Ole Miss, Mississippi State.
Yeah.
Those recruiting battles go typically pretty tight, but I think Ole Miss has turned that into an 80-20, 90-10 game over the last 2 years or so. So if you start really getting a foothold in the state of Mississippi as well, that's going to be overlooked because it's not sexy. They'll have a top 25 class anywhere from 20 to 25. But I'm telling you, man, quality-wise, they've done a really good job. They're raising the floor of their team via high school, which is not really something that you see.
And I feel like in the state of Mississippi, that's one of the states you evaluate. I feel like there's a lot more raw ability on the defensive side of the ball in that state, just from a prospect standpoint, than there are a bunch of offensive players. That's kind of why I thought Mississippi State going an offensive route was good, because you're not, as you know, at any high school level, how many polished offensive linemen out of the state of Mississippi has there been in a long time? Not really. You know what I'm saying? I feel like it's more of a raw defensive state from top to bottom.
For sure. Yeah. And, it's ironic. I'm heading down to Hattiesburg tomorrow for the Alabama Mississippi All-Star game, which I got to be honest. I mean, I think that is the most underrated event in all of recruiting. It is absolutely stacked. I mean, you think about some of the names that came out of that game last year: Peter Woods, Keldrick Falk,
Right,
Kelby Collins. You go down the line, man, absolutely loaded. That was just the Alabama side. So, no, I agree with you 110%. Mississippi is one of those states. I mean, they kind of split it in half right now, but if one of those guys can gain momentum like Ole Miss has done, that's going to go a long way for them in terms of kind of building a roster.
Absolutely. Coop, moving on to some other SEC schools. What are some names? What are some other programs you're feeling are kind of like heating up this early on the recruiting cycle with about another week and a half left till the early signing day?
Yeah, not so much the transfer side. I've been auditing Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, really the last week and have had my head there dug in. But I would say Auburn, man. Auburn really is exciting me. It's not the first time, but it is probably one of the first times that I've been able to really kind of dig on them extensively, A through Z. Very familiar with the guys at the top of the board. Cam Coleman, getting him from A&M, flipping him an in-state guy. Perry Thompson as well. This Bryce Kane, who we kind of had tucked in at the back end of the top 247, another guy, kind of a really nice compliment to those two big bodies. But I mean, you think about Auburn, what they've done at the receiver position alone. I think it kind of gets overlooked a little bit what Hugh Freeze did in Oxford, in terms of those type of body types that are really similar to what he's bringing in. Jamonte Waller, they get from Mississippi, the number one player in the state of Mississippi, DeMarcus Riddick. They flipped from Georgia, really athletic, second level
They
player.
flipped Waller from Florida, right?
Flipped Waller from Florida. Yeah. Riddick was originally committed to Georgia. The Walker White kid is like, 6'3", 215 from Arkansas. Athletic, traitsy, like Will Levis. Just,
Mhm.
if he hits, then the ceiling is going to be like top 40. We'll see what the floor is. We'll be at the All-American Bowl in San Antonio. And you just go down the list. They've just done a really good job in quality. I think the other thing you think about is they got 20 guys committed. One of them, a JUCO that they just took. 11 of them are from the state of Alabama. And Dave, you know as well as I do, but Alabama, Georgia, what comes with success is this expanded cone of recruiting, right? Like
Mhm.
geographically allows you to get in to some doors that maybe traditionally you wouldn't be in. It is good as a first year head coach now going into a second year. And I thought this with Billy Napier as well. It brings you back to the basics a little
Yeah.
bit, right? Like you have to take care of your 5 to 6 hour radius, 300-mile radius, as you're very familiar with at Alabama. Auburn has done that. They've done a tremendous job there, and I'll say that the further away you go from home, and I'm saying this in Alabama's case, the more vulnerable you are in your
Valid point.
backyard. And I think Auburn has done a tremendous job with some of these in-state IDs. I mean, Malik Blockton is a defensive lineman I like, probably a guy we'll put in the top 247. Caleb Harris, kid from Thompson, has played extremely well as a senior. D'Angelo Barber, another guy I like, is a high floor guy, going to be a really good program player. And then they kind of mix it in with guys like Malcolm Simmons, who's a very high ceiling type of guy as well. So I got to be honest, they're one of those teams that I think you combine what they've done on the recruiting trail. I expect them to be active via the transfer portal as well. I think they're a lot closer than I think a lot of people think, and I think they can make a lot of noise this year. We'll see what they do with the quarterback position. That's kind of my one thing. But here's the thing: I think Auburn under Freeze is also to a point from an administrative standpoint and from a collective standpoint that they're aligned. So I expect them not only to make some noise over the next 7 or 8 days, but transfer portal wise as well. They're the one team I have my eyes on that I'm like, they're too quiet right now. It almost doesn't make sense in terms of the
Eerily
quarterback
quiet.
market. I expect them to really kind of be in play for one of these ballers out there that I think can kind of plug and play and maybe put them a little bit ahead of schedule next year.
No, Cooper, I think you hit hammer on the head with that statement. I think Hugh Freeze and Auburn right now, from a recruiting standpoint, are the biggest threat to Alabama and Nick Saban since Nick Saban's been at Alabama. I mean, they had 2011, Gene Chizik signed a pretty good class, but a lot of that was building off the momentum of their national championship in 2010. But I think this is the biggest. I mean, Gus Malzahn would sign some guys every now and then that they would go get out of Georgia. But feels like you said, the first true threat because, like you said, Alabama's brand so big now. Like they can stretch from sea to shining sea. And like you said, who's manning the fort back home while Auburn's building those relationships? Auburn's going to be signing some guys at wide receiver that Auburn fans hadn't seen. I mean, who's Auburn traditionally not a big wide receiver school. I mean, who's the most successful NFL player to ever come from Auburn that's played wide receiver?
He's going to change that. The thing is like these two guys, you can maybe even expand it to three. The comp for us is for Cam Coleman is George Pickens. And, this guy from his junior to senior year, like he's an ascending player. He's starting to figure it out. The physical clay was already there, but he doubled his production on a state championship team, playing a high level of classification there in Alabama. Perry Thompson is another guy. Like these caliber of players that are top 32 guys that are still three-phase players.
Yeah.
After they've kind of already been elevated through the rankings, to me says a lot about their personality. Like some of my favorite things about Perry Thompson is what he does defensively. So these guys they're different physically, and they're going to be ready to play day one. So I mean, he's already changing the dynamic of that offense just based on what he's doing at receiver. Like you said, like when's the last time Auburn had the guy? And now in one cycle, they might have two of them.
Cooper, get last question for you here. And again, Cooper Petagna with us, national recruiting analyst from 247 Sports. Again, I think Cooper's unique from a standpoint is he's not just your traditional media guy. There's nothing, I'm not saying that in a bad way, but he's actually lived it, breathed it to some extent. It's been his life for 10 years. So that's where I think you bring a great perspective from that standpoint. But last question, Coop, before we get you out of here again, appreciate you taking the time. Give us some feedback if you watch these guys yet, because I know you got a ton going on with the high school standpoint, the early Sunday. But the feedback for Brock Vandergrift going to Kentucky and the Taylor Green kid going to Arkansas, coming over from Boise State. What's some initial thoughts for some Kentucky fans, Arkansas fans, as they're receiving those commitments here the last week?
Yeah, I had a brief introduction to Vandegrift. I mean, I think I was at Oregon still, so that wasn't a guy that really kind of came across the radar. I think we did some kind of loose vetting of Vandegrift at that point. But what I remember was, here's a guy, big, athletic, 6'2", 6'3" plus, could run, played a lower level of comp, I believe, out of the state of Georgia. And to me, he was a kind of a one-speed guy. The biggest question mark I always had with him was his ability to kind of change velocities, layer the football, and play with touch, anticipation, and accuracy. That being said, that doesn't mean that's not a guy that you can't win with, right? The other side of that is we just haven't seen a lot of him, right? The little tape that I watched off of PFF, I liked. I thought he did some good things. I think he's got some gamer to him. But other than that, don't have too much of an opinion. The Taylor Green one's pretty interesting. I worked with Bush Hamden, Taylor Green's offensive coordinator, when I was at Washington. Green and Bush obviously worked together at Boise over the last year or so. And, here's a guy you turn on the tape, you watch the last two games of the season, UNLV, and you watch the Air Force game, and you see this big 6'5", 220-pound, long, athletic kid. Kind of reminds you of Matt Jones a little bit. I think you might have said that on Twitter.
Yeah.
Does some things that really impress you. I think the other thing is, I want to say he was 11-9 TD to INT this year.
Yeah,
so I think the biggest thing, talking to Bush at Boise was, the turnover issues, right? Just cleaning it up a little bit. Was he going to be able to do the things that they needed to do within the structure of the offense when they're down, 2 or 3 possessions to some of the better opponents on their schedule? So that being said, man, we've seen it in a lot of different places. You never know what the ingredient is that makes these guys click, whether it's Jade Daniels at LSU, whether it's Bo Nix at Oregon, and the list kind of goes on and on. The other thing is the top passers, the top 6 passers in the FBS this year were all transfer quarterbacks. And, the stat that I go back to is like over 50% of the starters at that position are transfers, right? So that shouldn't be that much of a surprise anymore. But, I think the other thing that you think about with him is, he's got a couple years left to play, right? So if they get the right guy, you think about that jump Jaden Daniels made from year 1 to year 2. A lot of people thought, all right, this is a guy that's really not going to challenge the deep part of the field. He completely he turned that narrative on its head, from his first to second season in Baton Rouge. So I do think this is a guy that's got some developmental upside, but they're going to have to play within his strengths in his first year at Arkansas.
Coop, I appreciate you joining us again, guys. National recruiting analyst, 247 Sports, Cooper Petagna, taking the time. Appreciate you, Coop. You gave us 28 solid minutes, brother. I appreciate it. Signing day next Wednesday, guys. This is when your team is building their roster and future rosters for the next year and into the future next 2 years. So, Cooper, no one better coming on here, talking recruiting, talking some SEC football. He's worked in it, lived it for a decade. Coop, I appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you, Dave.
Later, brother.
See ya.
Again, Cooper Petagna joining us from 247 Sports. Does a phenomenal job. Fantastic guy. Great from a scouting standpoint. Does a phenomenal job breaking it down, understanding what he's looking at, how it fits into certain systems. Got a ton of networking. Talked to a ton of people. Again, has worked at numerous different places. Went to LSU, worked at Washington, Michigan, Oregon, and now works for 247 Sports and does a fantastic job evaluating the Southeast for them. So I appreciate him taking the time joining us tonight. But again, the show must roll on. Let's go around the SEC first. Texas A&M. I don't think we talked about it last Thursday, and I apologize. Hiring Colin Klein, offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach from K-State. I think this is a pretty good fit for Mike Elko. Similar personalities. If you don't remember, Colin Klein played quarterback at K-State, was there with Bill Snyder, stayed with Chris Kleiman, had heard from people that know him pretty well that he got offers every year and entertained it. I don't really think he was real fired up with how Kleiman's setup was. sounds like Texas A&M was the perfect job, perfect fit. I like the hire. The system will be interesting there. Speaking of Kansas State, it's been Texas, the Manhattan to College Station train here. I guess corner Will Blanket Lee from K-State may have hopped on the same jet with Colin Klein on his way to College Station. I doubt it. I'm just saying that. But he committed to Texas A&M. Blanket. I hadn't heard that name in a while. I think Michael Jackson's kid was named Blanket, but interesting name there. I mean, I get it. Blanket, covering people like he's a blanket on some of these receivers. But Will Blanket Lee from Kansas State committed to Texas A&M. Arkansas, we just talked about it, getting a commitment from Boise State quarterback Taylon Green. Green up and down season, as me and Cooper talked about in 2023, hitting 57% of his passes for 1,700 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, while also rushing for 436 yards and 9 touchdowns. From Louisville, Texas, had an up and down season. Like I said, started the first 5 games, played the next 5 as a backup, then started again and finished strong to close out the season. So in his final 3 contests, 67%, 547 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Was MVP of the Mountain West Conference championship game. Crazy. I mean, Boise State fired their coach and ended up winning the conference. It's crazy, but solid get for Taylon Green. That'll be Bobby Petrino's first experiment at quarterback back in Fayetteville. Mississippi State wide receiver Xavier Thomas will be visiting LSU. Again, LSU's had some success with some transfer portal guys throughout the SEC, but still waiting. You had Aaron Anderson from Alabama and Shaz Preston. They didn't really do a ton this past year. In 2023, maybe they have a big bowl game, but we'll be interested to see how Xavier Thomas responds to that. I mean, he had a pretty solid year for being a part of the 13th. I think Mississippi State finished 13th out of 14th in the SEC in passing. So it'll be interesting from that standpoint. Mississippi State received 2 big commitments on Sunday. 2024 quarterback Michael Van Buren from St. Francis in Baltimore, Maryland, and Mario Carver, wide receiver from Clay Chalkville High School right outside Alabama. So Jeff Lebby and the boys right off the bat, exciting young guy who is an offensive coach. Like I said, what 2 positions do these guys play? Quarterback, most important position in sports. If you're a frequent visitor to this show, you hear me say that all the time. And a big-time wide receiver that Alabama was sniffing around, Mario Craver from Clay Chalkville and Birmingham. 2 big gets for Jeff Lebby and the boys. Auburn got a commit from Snow College offensive tackle Seth Wilford, the 6'6", 295 prospect committed to Auburn today. Me and Cooper talked about it. The premium positions, edge rushers and offensive tackles, guys that can protect the quarterback, really offensive linemen in general. Teams are going to stretch on some of these guys. Like I mentioned, the Southern Miss offensive line transfer, I forget his name every time, and I apologize. But he was an all right player when I went on and turned on the film. But again, it's a position of need. People are going to stretch, overpay. I mean, I think in today's game, we can say they overpay now. But speaking of pay, fantastic collective we got going on here with Walker Jones and Ole Miss, the Grove Collective. Ole Miss gets Trey Harris announced he was coming back today, along with Micah Pettis announcing he's coming back. Sounds like Ole Miss has got the advantage with wide receiver, South Carolina wide receiver transfer Antoine Juice Wells. And then Florida edge defender, their best edge rusher from this past year, Princely Yuma Malayan, is visiting Ole Miss as we speak right now. No one's had a better day than Ole Miss. No one has had a better day than Ole Miss. Like I said, shout out to the Grove Collective and Walker Jones, who played at Ole Miss, who's over it. Ole Miss and Auburn, from an outside perspective, again, I haven't seen all 14 teams, war chest as I call it, or collective, but it sounds like those 2 are on the same page from an organization standpoint. It sounds like them and the football program, the collective at both Auburn and Ole Miss, are on the same page with their football programs and their head coach, Hugh Freeze and Lane Kiffin. But, man, Ole Miss definitely won the day today. A lot of great news coming out of Oxford. Alabama defensive lineman Anquan Barnes entering the portal, spent 3 years in Tuscaloosa. Solid depth player, just couldn't get on the field. This isn't real shocking. Florida announces Will Harris, new secondary coach. Remember Corey Raymond, former DB coach. Most people know him from LSU, but he was at Florida, was first 2 years under Billy Napier. But Will Harris replacing him, coming over from the Los Angeles Rams, was Georgia Southern's defensive coordinator, was the secondary coach at Washington. Just a big announcement. Younger guy, 36 years old, should do a solid job for – it's a must-have year for Billy Napier next year. Let's call it what it is. But speaking of Florida, landed a defensive tackle, Brian Taylor from Blinn Community College. It used to be when you signed a JUCO kid, you wanted him to play immediately. A lot of these teams are using these guys now as just depth pieces. Corner sticking around the SEC. Corner Julian Humphrey sounded like he may enter the portal for the Georgia Bulldogs. So it'll be interesting from that perspective. Speaking of corner, going over to Knoxville, Tennessee, the Nico Slaughter entered the portal over the weekend. Kamal Hayden probably going to go to the portal. So it sounds like a lot of Tennessee's production in the back end. There's a veteran crew who's going to be entering the portal, testing that water. Tennessee got good news, though, similar to Ole Miss, getting an offensive lineman back and offensive tackle Gerald Mincy, announcing he will be back for the 2024 season. So some good and bad news in Knoxville for Josh Heupel and his squad. Missouri gets a big commitment from Georgia State running back Marcus Carroll, trying to replace the leading rusher in the SEC, Cody Schrader, who had a fantastic season in 2023. It's a big get for Eli Drinkwitz and them. Ran for over 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns. South Carolina received a big commit from Coastal Carolina wide receiver Jared Brown. Honorable mention in the Sun Belt last year, had 58 catches for 740 yards, 4 touchdowns. 6 foot, 190 guy, had 252 yards rushing on 15 carries. Throw a touchdown in there as well. So another solid piece for South Carolina. Defensive tackle Jerome Simmons from Highland Community College committed to the Gamecocks, and Shane Beamer as well. So two big commitments for South Carolina. And then wrapping it up, going to Nashville. Last stop around the SEC here. Vanderbilt getting some commitments on the back end in the secondary. Vandy received 2 of them. TCU transfer Randon Fontenette, and then Wyoming transfer Colby Taylor. I think Fontenette played in every game but was not a starter at TCU. And then the Wyoming transfer Colby Taylor, looking at it, I think started 8 of the 9 games. I'm hearing Vanderbilt may be investing a lot of money in NIL, maybe raising that. But the big issue for the Doors, as we all know, are they going to drop those academic standards for their athletes? I don't know that. I mean, again, it's one of the best universities in the country. Those presidents usually just don't bend to the knee at a school like Vanderbilt or Duke like that just for athletics. That'll be the big part. They can have all the money in the world, but if you can't get these kids into school, it doesn't matter. But again, 2 big commits for the Vanderbilt Commodores, Randon Fontenette from TCU and Colby Taylor from Wyoming. And that's a trip around the SEC. Some coaching updates, like I mentioned. Will Harris, new secondary coach at Florida. And we touched on every other team in the portal. Not a lot of portal news, though, out of Kentucky. So it's the only team I didn't mention from that perspective. Still keep an eye on Texas A&M staff. Mike Elko's still building it. Is offered the job to a couple of his Duke guys. Tyler Santucci, his defense coordinator, he declined him. Was hired as Duke strength coach, but he said no. I don't know why, but the staff's slowly being built. Brought on secondary coach Ishmael Artside, who I've worked with at Auburn. Fantastic recruiter, fantastic developer. He'll do a great job. And then I like the Colin Klein hire, the offensive coordinator position. But outside of that, not a lot of hires for Mike Elko and his first staff at Texas A&M, but we will keep you updated on that. Let's go to New York City. Let's go back in time. Let's go to Jaden Daniels. I don't have to tell you, he won the Heisman on Saturday night, and they got it right, I believe. But let me tell you, I started thinking a little bit more of Michael Penix, though, as Saturday got closer. I would have voted for Jaden Daniels. I think he won it. I think people are penalizing him because they lost 3 games to Alabama, Florida State, and who am I missing? And Ole Miss. But Michael Penix, fantastic year. I mean, he really did have a fantastic year. And some people are like, well, I got asked on a show, should Jordan Travis win the Heisman since they got left out because he wasn't because he got left out? Florida State got left out because he wasn't there and he wouldn't be able to play because he was hurt. So that's a fair statement, but I also thought that boosted up Michael Penix, his Heisman argument as well, because he finished the season with led the best passing attack in the country. This Washington offense that I think has a fantastic matchup against Texas. Right now, I'm leaning towards picking Washington. I think overall Texas may be the better team, but I can see on January 1st in New Orleans, it's a big mismatch. Washington and Michael Penix got the advantage over Texas secondary. But that's another conversation for another day. But Michael Penix has been as important as anyone else. Undefeated, 13-0 Power 5 team. I think you could have easily made an argument with him, but I think you got it right with Jaden Daniels. Let me share the screen here, the final Heisman voting. Where do we go? Final Heisman voting. Pull it up for him. Here we go. Let me share it. up here? Are you going to pull it up? Oh, I don't know why it's not pulling up there. Let's refresh this thing. I had it pulled up. I maybe accidentally. All right, here we go. All right, so as you can see, Jaden Daniels won it. No surprise. Then you had Michael Penix Jr. finishing second, Bo Nix third, Marvin Harrison fourth, Marvin Harrison Jr. fourth, Jordan Travis fifth, Jalen Milroe sixth, seventh Ollie Gordon, the running back from Oklahoma State, eighth Cody Schrader, ninth Blake Corum, and 10th J.J. McCarthy. Michigan having two guys in there. My thing I have is who is voting for the Heisman in here? Who is voting? I looked it up. We have over 800 voters at vote on the Heisman Trophy right now. And I thought about this. It would probably be an equivalent to something. I'm going to take this off and stop sharing for a minute. It would probably be even an equivalent. Think about this: 800 people voting for the Heisman. You think all 800 of those people are really locked in to college football and actually watch the sport, go back and watch the games and stuff like that? I go back and watch every game in the SEC. My wife's always like, man, you got to work a lot on Sunday. You got 7 games. So a lot of people will just go watch the highlights and stuff. I don't do that. Again, not toot my own horn. I'm not mad about being a Heisman voter. I'd expect to do that in my first 2 years of building Mach 10 Sports, but we will one day. We'll be a Heisman voter, guarantee it. But right now, who are these 800 people? It would be like, I didn't go to a big high school. I graduated with about 75, 80 kids. But, I went to the University of Alabama with a bunch of guys in my fraternity some guys I worked with at football there that graduated with guys, 400, 500 guys in their class. I equate it to this. When they go back and flip through their yearbook, they're going to be like, I don't recognize that guy. I don't recognize that guy. I don't recognize who is that guy. I feel like if you gave me a list of all the 800 voters on the Heisman, I would do the same thing. Now, for me, I graduated with 65, 70 people. I could tell you probably about a single interaction I had with everybody I graduated with. 65, 70 people, most people could. That's not tooting my own horn. But if I went to a big high school with anywhere from 400 to 600 kids I graduated with, if I went back and opened my yearbook from 2008, I wouldn't be able to. I'd be like, who is that? Who is that? I guarantee you at least, bare minimum, 50, 60 kids. That's how I would feel, and I feel like most of the country would feel if you gave me a list of the Heisman voters out of those 800 people. My point being, there is no way in Haiti you have 800 people that have a real pulse on the sport of college football right now that should have a vote in the most important individual award in sports. I said it, in the most important individual award in sports. You can't tell me there are 800 quality or deserving people who should vote on that. They're just not. Just the way they vote and stuff. And again, I think they got it right with Jaden Daniels. You could have made a case with Michael Penix with me, and you could have been exactly right. It's not about the results. It's just about 800. There's no way in Haiti. The way we vote on awards and stuff right now, we have people who really don't care about the sport, first of all, don't really know what they're looking at right now. And that's been a big point of conversation recently because I've been getting into it with all the Twitter warriors about eye tests, what has to matter, and why the hell would even watch the games. And then I just think, people would invest time going back and watching the games and actually have an understanding of like, hey, who is the new coordinator? Who's the quarterback? Who's the quarterback behind him? What kind of offensive system are they running? Is the head coach aggressive or not? Is he like Dan Lanning? Stuff like that. I don't feel like people really talk about. But again, not going to get on my soapbox there. Just talking about, I think they got it right. Jaden Daniels won it. Michael Penix is right after him. And my issue is just how we vote. How many voters? After I looked that up, I was like, what the 800 people? You can't tell me there's 800 people out there with the way they voted, not only this year but in the past, that really have a real pulse on college football and deserve to have that vote, because you need to take that vote serious. It's the most important individual award in sports. I don't care what people say. I don't. Sorry, went on my soapbox there. Let me get a sip of water. I promise you, we're not going much longer tonight, guys. Stick with me, though. Take off your shoes. Put on your basketball shoes here. We're heading to the hardwood. We had a big weekend in the college basketball and in the SEC specifically. Let's go back. Let me go review these matchups in this past Saturday, the December 9th slate, and briefly go over those for you. Starting on Saturday. So starting off early and hot in the Thanksgiving Hoops Classic and a Hoopsgiving Hoops Classic, the 10:30 tip-off. But Mississippi State, who was barely getting over 65 points in their last two losses to Georgia Tech and Southern University, goes It almost doubles that in a single game against a solid Tulane team, 106. Mississippi State putting 106 points up. The Hubbard kid, man, unbelievable, shooting lights out. I mean, unbelievable. Josh Hubbard shot lights out, but Mississippi State bouncing back, one of the best offensive productions in years for them, especially since the Jans era. I know it's only been 2 years, but 30-point win against Tulane. Kentucky getting a solid win against a Penn team. They look solid. Aaron Bradshaw came back. He's been hurt. I think Kentucky's got the highest ceiling in the league. I mean, Reed Shepherd, true freshman, shooting lights out from beyond the arc. Aaron Bradshaw's coming back. You got Mitchell down there. Antonio Reeves firing it up. You got DJ Wagner. Kentucky may win this league. I'm telling you, this is Cal's highest ceiling team since probably the 14-15 Kentucky team that didn't lose a game. And I'm not saying they're like that team. I think it's the highest upside team they have. Watch out. Watch out. I'm telling you. South Carolina getting the 68-62 win over a solid East Carolina team. Nothing to write home to your mom about, but it was a trap game for South Carolina. They dropped a heartbreaker to Clemson earlier in the week that they probably felt like they should have won. It was their first loss. And South Carolina and Lamont Paris are tremendously improved. Love what they are doing. Michi Johnson leading that team. BJ Mach brings a whole different perspective to that team. Great passer, can shoot from beyond the arc. This was a trap game. Could have sulked in, but you didn't. And you went on the road and got a solid win. This loss could have hurt you, but instead you avoided that. It's a mature team. Then you went Illinois, headed to Thompson Boling Arena. Tennessee, one of their better performances of the season, in my opinion. Beating a solid Illinois team coached by Brad Underwood, 86-79, got an early win. Great job by Rick Barnes and that team. Dalton Connect really doing it all for that team. Great pickup for them, but a big win for Tennessee. LSU dropping another one at home to Kansas State back-to-back years. K-State, Jerome Tang and the boys getting a 75-60 win over LSU. Don't have a lot to say about that one. But LSU, man, we'll get to the power rankings here. They'll be at the bottom. LSU fans were a little fired up. I didn't put them last. I'll warn you on that. Alabama dropped a tough one in Toronto in Zach Edey's hometown, 92-86. Alabama will score anybody, but yes, any decent team with a pulse they play, they've given up 85 plus. Even in a win against a solid Oregon team, they gave up 91. But to Oregon, Ohio State, Clemson, and now Purdue, they've given up a ton of points. They've given up a ton of points. So that's the issue for Alabama. I think they're number 2 offensive efficiency team in the league. They're number 2 in the country. They're 85th, I think, defensive efficiency in the country. It's just all over the place right now. Alabama has one of the higher ceilings in the league if they get better. Again, Zach Edey just dominated, dropped 35. It was his homecoming. But I was actually impressed a little bit with the front court. They got in trouble with fouls early. But I thought a guy like Muhammad Wiggy grew in this game. He grew, which I think I'm not upset with that Alabama loss. I was actually impressed with this. This was a game they got out, but they were up 11 early. They were up at half. They took the lead by 1 with about 3.5, 4 minutes to go. A game they certainly could have won. I just don't think officials know how to ref Zach Edey. I mean, there's no 3 seconds in the lane anymore. You can camp out 10 seconds. There's not a lot of guys down there like him that play like a true post, back to the wall guy. He never gets called for fouls in the first 30 minutes, but Alabama has 3 or 4 guys in foul trouble while he doesn't get called for 30 minutes. If I was Nate Oates, I'd have been. He got teed up ultimately in that game, but I would have been on the refs' tails about the 3 seconds. Like, do we not call that anymore? Just because the refs don't see true bigs like that anymore, play their back to the goal. I don't know. It's something to be fair about it. But if you're Alabama, you're not discouraged. This loss ain't going to hurt you. It's a game they could have won, though. And I think they need one of these next 2. I think they need to finish 2-2 down the stretch here. But they got at Arizona and Phoenix. It's a neutral site, but essentially a road game on Wednesday night at 10 o'clock, randomly enough. And they go to Creighton on Saturday. I think Creighton's a very winnable game for them. And they still got Liberty to finish out. I think they need to go 2-1 in those. And they need to get 2 out of those 3. You feel solid. But again, I was impressed with Alabama, especially offensively. Mark Sears went off. Grant Nelson played even though he's banged up. Left encouraged by Alabama. I think this game will test them. This 3-game stretch between Purdue, Arizona, and Creighton will definitely make them better by season's end. Auburn looking impressive, getting a 104-76 win in the afternoon cap of that Hoops Giving tournament in Atlanta at State Farm Arena that Tulane and Mississippi State played in. Auburn was down 11 right off the bat, and just, man, Jalen Williams had a hell of a game. Auburn and Aiden Holloway. Auburn shot better than they have all year in this game. Beaten up on probably not a real – I think Indiana's in trouble. I don't think they're a tournament team, but Auburn nonetheless put a 104-76 beat down on them. They're impressive, most impressive win of the season. Oklahoma Porter Moser and the boys, they're solid, man. They beat up on Alabama last year in the middle of the year. You remember that in the Big 12 SEC Challenge, but Oklahoma getting the 79-70 win in Tulsa over Arkansas. Must gets ejected. Eric Musselman gets ejected. Javon Brazile played a little bit, didn't look healthy. Arkansas, Must still trying to figure it out. Usually, though, they're a little bit better at this point in the year. They struggled at the very beginning of conference play. But Oklahoma, real team this year. They're undefeated, I believe, right now. I like what Oklahoma's doing. Arkansas is still offensively. I just don't see the outside perimeter shooting that we thought was improved like we did at the beginning of the year. Big win for Oklahoma, future SEC team. Arkansas, you have to go gather it up, boys. And Florida, didn't watch much of this game, but got the 87-76 win over the Richmond Spiders. I did watch Richmond early in the year. This is not your traditional 5-6 seed Richmond Spider team. It's not. That could get a 11-12 seed in the NCAA tournament or knock them off, upset them earlier is what I mean. But Richmond, usually solid. But again, Florida, still trying to figure out that lineup. Walter Clayton, the Iona transfer, doing it for him. Tyrese Samuel. I still think Todd Golden's trying to figure out that rotation. Right now, they may go 8-10 deep. I still think they're trying to figure that out. Could see that heading to conference play. And then the last one, Kansas getting the 73-64 win in Allen Fieldhouse. Missouri competed. They're not better than Kansas, but they've improved since that loss to Jackson State that will haunt them all season. Got to give credit to Dennis Gates for that. And Sunday's action, we had Ole Miss, the only undefeated team left in the SEC, gets a big win over a solid Big 12 team in UCF, the 70-68 win. Muhammad Cisse is Musa Cisse, sorry, is a tremendous impact player for Ole Miss. Ole Miss, you better watch out. They may be undefeated. Let's look at the schedule. They may be undefeated heading into conference play, and I think they will. That trip, their first game is at Tennessee. Yeah, so I mean, they got Cal, Troy, at Southern Miss and Biloxi, Mississippi, Bryant, and at Tennessee. They're going to be favored. They'll be favored to be undefeated heading to that Knoxville matchup, and they're going to have a good showing in there. But Ole Miss, Chris Beard, man, people killed me being like, you would hire that guy? Ole Miss did it right. They hired him on the week of the NCAA tournament. No one really talked about it. So I don't think it's as big of a deal as people thought. And then finally, Memphis, a team Ole Miss has beat. Memphis 2-1 against the SEC has beaten Arkansas. Now Texas A&M with Memphis getting the 81-75 win. Former SEC players, Javon Quinterly, former Alabama point guard, and Jaquan Walton, who was on Alabama's team for a possession before he got a possession of marijuana. Alabama kicked him off. So two former Alabama players, older team from Memphis, going on the road, getting a big win for Texas A&M. Where does the scoring come from consistently, though, for Ole Miss? For Texas A&M. Wade Taylor, could it come for him? Sure. After that, I don't really see it. Tyrese Boots Radford, he's been injured a little bit. Henry Coleman, maybe. A&M's going to be that team I could see really struggle in the road. They kind of sense that team to me because I don't think they're going to get remember, Buzz Williams and his team love picking up fouls, getting their points at the free throw line. They're not going to get that on the road with the calls. It's just how it goes in the SEC and really college basketball in general and the sport of basketball in general. You don't expect to get the calls or the free throws you would at home. But again, massive weekend for the SEC. So solid performance. But let's go through the week, the updated schedule heading into this week through Thursday for you. Tomorrow, you got Georgia Southern Tennessee at 6 p.m. on the SEC Network. Should be another solid win for Tennessee. You got some good ones. You got on Wednesday, right? Let me see. Yeah, there we go. So on Wednesday, Murray State at Mississippi State. And then you got Alabama State, LSU, and UNC Asheville, Auburn. That'll be Wednesday's slate. I would expect the SEC to get a clean slate there. And then you got East Carolina at Florida. Remember, this is a team South Carolina just beat, this East Carolina team. But Florida should be able to handle some business at home. Let me go back. I was seeing let's see. Let's look at this for a minute. Not that the standings matter. All right, so there. Got you. All right, so I was looking at Alabama's schedule. They got Creighton Saturday, then Wednesday, Arizona. So it should be a good matchup. It should be some great matchups coming up here. Hell, that Alabama stretch, it's freaking hellacious right there. Freaking hellacious. Let's stop sharing there. All right. Time for me to give you my SEC basketball power rankings before we get you out of here. Here we go. All right. Already got some pretty good feedback already off these. Starting at 14th, Vanderbilt just took a loss to San Francisco last week. It's going to be on the struggle bus. It's going to be on the struggle bus. Yeah. Once they get some players back there, Jerry Stackhouse and his team always make some incremental improvement for sure. I expect that a little bit out of them. LSU, again, some of their fans commented they were just jacked. They weren't 14th. Just Matt McMahon, this team is not very good. They come in at 13th. I think this is where you get into the SEC from 12 to 1 could beat each other on a given day. That sounds crazy, but Georgia, solid team. I think Mike White in his second year has some scores. They're getting used to that lineup, his rotation. I think they could upset some teams, especially in Stegman this year. Missouri feel the same way. Outside of the Jackson State loss, they've gotten better since then. Battled Kansas, even though they took a double-digit loss, but that was to be expected. Missouri's going to compete. They got a good coach in Dennis Gates. Florida, I mentioned Todd Golden's still trying to figure out that lineup. Comes in at 10th. Number 9, South Carolina, only one loss. Thought they had a mature win against East Carolina after dropping a game to their in-state rival Clemson that they probably thought they should have won. Number 8, Mississippi State, coming in at 8. I know some people, why are they not higher? And they had a rough week 2 weeks ago, or a week, but when they lost to Southern University and Georgia Tech, 2 not very good teams. And somebody be like, well, Georgia Tech beat Duke. Wasn't a good win for Mississippi State. For Mississippi State, solid news, though. Sounds like Tolu Smith has a big X-ray on Thursday. He's starting to shoot free throws, some jumpers. I bet he's back towards closer to the middle of SEC play, but it's positive news. Keep an update. We maybe should have an update on Thursday's show, but reading Chris Jans' press conference, that's what I got. But number 8, after a big-time offensive outbreak on Saturday against Tulane with 106 points. 7th, Arkansas. What is this team going to be like? Muss has got to figure it out. I just put them in the middle. I didn't really have a good feel. You could argue Mississippi State could be ahead of them. They got to get Trevon Brazile healthy, though. Muss has got to get the rotation and settle in, and they got to be able to start shooting better from the perimeter. Ole Miss, the only undefeated team, coming in at 6th. Ole Miss Rebels, Chris Beard, only getting better each week. I remember watching them play Detroit Mercy, seeing Houston State. They just looked rough, but they keep getting better. They're the only SEC team to beat Memphis, a solid Memphis team that will be in the NCAA tournament at UCF. That's another quad 2 win for them. It's a Big 12 opponent on the road. Chris Beard getting the most out of this team. Texas A&M coming out at 5. I know they dropped to Memphis, and some people may be, how are they not ahead of Ole Miss? Ole Miss is undefeated. Ole Miss won the common opponent game against Memphis. A&M's still a solid team. I don't like to go play in College Station if I was another SEC team. A&M's going to be tough at home again this year. They could struggle on the road, but I like them at 5th. Alabama, I think them and Kentucky, as you see Kentucky at 2nd, we're not hiding anything, have the highest upsides out of teams in the SEC. If Alabama can figure the defense out at all, get it in that 60-70 range offensive efficiency, I don't think this is a championship team for Alabama because you got to play some kind of defense. And you look back on Nate Oates' great teams. They always score, but his 2 best teams, the 2020-2021 team and 2022-2023 team last year, were top 10 in defensive efficiency. Still got to get stops. So I don't really like Alabama as a tournament team right now. They're going to make the tournament, I think. They need to get one of those next 2 against Creighton or Arizona, probably most likely Creighton on Saturday. But just don't know. Bama's got a high ceiling. I think this could be the best offensive team Oates has. So that's why I had them at 4. Auburn, I think one of the deepest teams in the league. When they're playing well offensively, they're going to be tough to beat. And obviously, especially at home in the jungle, probably the toughest environment in the SEC, in my opinion, because it's so small and it's so compact around you, which I'm not even taking a shot at being small. That's probably what a lot of teams need. But Auburn, deep team, had an offensive outburst. Jalen Williams, Aiden Holloway. Auburn gets that. They had a chance maybe to finish in the top 2, if not win the league. Kentucky, I think they have the highest upside, especially with Aaron Bradshaw coming back. Love the Cats at 2. Big one against North Carolina this week. Then I think Tennessee, highest floor team in the league, consistent. Adding Dalton Connect from an offensive standpoint has really helped the Vols. They need to start getting Zakai Ziegler once he starts building more health, more trust in that knee coming off that ACL injury. Getting Vescovy going. He's going to have his game at some point. Then factor in some of the Jordan Gainey, who transferred in too. I like that. Then obviously Josiah Jordan-James, Jonas Adu, guys like that, they'll filter that in. But I like Tennessee, again, highest floor in the league. But that is the Week 5 SEC basketball power rankings. And that is the entire show for you. So I appreciate you joining us on this episode of Mach 10 Sports. We covered a lot. We had 247 Sports national recruiting analyst Cooper Petagna, who's had boots in the ground at multiple Power 5 programs. He's actually worked in it. worked in the day in the life of college football people, just like me, 10 years. Had a great perspective with signing day just being over a week away. Talked to portal, high school recruiting, some strategies he would use as a personnel guy if he was still in it. We talked around the SEC, talked every SEC program, coaching changes. Will Harris now at Florida, the secondary coach coming over from the Rams. We talked the big weekend it was in the SEC basketball. So. And then we finished up with the Week 5 SEC basketball ranking. So we had a great episode, to the point, a lot of information. Again, guys, it's easy. Go like and subscribe. We're on anywhere you get your podcast. Go tell us what you like. Send us questions. My number's at the bottom here, 205-792-6925. Send us questions, suggestions. I'm here for you. But again, I do appreciate you joining us on this episode of Mach 10 Sports. You have a fantastic night.